Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. And, if you have never listened to this podcast before, I invite you to go check out our archives because we've got about 12 years worth of interviews with intelligent CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies or organizations. Some of our recent ones include Redfin and Quicken. We've got Grubhub coming up. We also have Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, many more. Go check out the archives. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. Quick shout out to Cindy Norcott, past guest on my podcast here, as mutual friends with my guest here today. And we're really privileged to talk to him. His name is Matthew Willman. He's a South Africa-based photographer. And get this, trained as a ballet dancer, turned that career into photography. And because I've had so many different turns in my career, I love to ask people about how they went from A to Z in that fashion. He's also the author of Tripping Over Presidents and the new book, Stepping Away. And get this, he has done amazing work with Nelson Mandela, Bill Clinton, a number of US presidents, a number of African presidents. He's been commissioned with a number of world leaders, former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, Desmond Tutu, 12 Nobel Peace Prize laureates. So just a long list of amazing, interesting world leaders who he's worked with. And I love to ask people about what that experience is like working with those types of individuals. So we'll definitely ask about that as well. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, my company, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. As always, go to our website, rise25.com, or email us at support@rise25.com if you want to learn more about it. All right, Matthew, such a pleasure to have you here. And let's just start at this transition. I'm a recovering lawyer, worked in politics, worked in the entertainment industry. I have this weird roundabout career that maybe says that I can't do any one thing for a longer period of time. But you went from ballet dancer to photographer. I'd love to know, first of all, did everyone say you were crazy when you did that? And secondly, how did you make that transition? Because that is not easy to do.
John, thank you. It's great to chat, and thank you for the platform that you create for us out in the wilds. Ballet was always a part of me since I started when I was 5, because they needed a tin soldier for a Nutcracker scene for my sister's ballet show, and where she stopped 3 years later, I carried on for another 21 years. So I was literally born into it, and I ended up doing my teachers in ballet and in Chiketi Ballet. And then, I live in a country that is not conducive to ballet. I mean, when you think of the great ballet stages in the world, none of them are in Africa. We have wonderful ballet schools here, and I always knew that if I needed something else in my life away from ballet. And as a creative, who's very strong in visual communication and in the visual sense, it was a no-brainer that photography just fell into my lap. I'm a bit of a mixture of a lot of things. So I grew up in the last throes of apartheid, where it was not easy to separate and ignore what was going on in this country. And while, it was literally a case of in a ballet school or in a class doing ballet in 35 degrees, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you've got military helicopters flying over you to farm uprisings in the townships around us. So it was the juxtaposition between this elitist world of ballet and right outside my door was rioting and, uprisings against the former nationalist government. And I think it wasn't so much a schism of ballet must go out the window and I must now become Mandela's photographer. It was a gentle transition of this awakening as a young man. I was 15 years old when Nelson Mandela came to power, and I became so passionate about this hope we had, this hope for a country that finally was able to feel liberated, not only politically, but socially. And we could talk to Black people, we could have an interaction with them, and that the arts had a voice. And I never looked back. I mean, I had a choice to leave South Africa. I chose to stay, and I just happened to be in a position where I was dancing, and I picked up the camera, and I ended up studying photography. And then at 23, I ended up with Nelson Mandela. It was interesting. People always kept a wide eye to me. They were like, "What is Matthew doing now? You know, well, he should be doing X," but no, he's with Mandela now. So it was wonderful.
I want to ask about that. Strangely, you know, at 23 years old, that's when I got my job at the White House. And I look back at it now and I feel it was such a privilege to have that opportunity to be in the presence of world leaders. So I definitely want to dwell on that. But first, going back to the ballet, what was it like as a kid having an interest in this field of the arts that was not at all a big field in your area? You know, you're 13, 14, 15 years old, and kids want to be all kinds of different things. And you said you wanted to go into ballet. What was that like?
I was so privileged because I was moving with the times in South Africa. So if I had grown up doing ballet in 1970s or 80s, I think I would have been ostracized horribly, because we lived in a state of emergency under a white nationalist government that believed white was right and military power was everything. And we lived a very confined, conservative world. But yet here, come 1990, Mandela was released, and I was 11 years old when he was released. All of a sudden, people wanted to start engaging in things that they deemed as it's not right for a boy to do ballet also. And I actually had a lot of support. If I look back on it, I really did. Schools were opening up to multiracial education. We were accepting people who had talents and abilities that were frowned upon in the apartheid era. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, where the opportunity to dance was celebrated. And not everyone, of course. I mean, we don't have a perfect country, but definitely the community I was with and around. And I just loved how Africans can just celebrate through music. And so my dance changed too. So yeah. It was a great period.
Talk to me about the early days of your photography, when you start to learn the craft and then start to turn it into something that can generate money for you, can support you professionally. Do you remember some of your early commissions or your early gigs getting paid to do photography?
So America as a society, as a country, has had a huge impact around the world on developing cultures and developing, like from fashion to movies, particularly the Hollywood scene, everything. So we all grew up under this umbrella of, what is America producing now? How do we become more American? You know, we were so isolated. I mean, we didn't have Coca-Cola, we didn't have McDonald's, we didn't have anything. So everything was, even Pizza Hut. So this whole idea of how I, used dance as this creative and photography. I wanted to be Annie Leibovitz, I wanted to be a Richard Avedon, great American photographers who just showed us so much of what can be achieved through photography. So when I picked up the camera and I started studying photography, being advertising, portraits, all the high-end photography was definitely, I even majored in fourth year in that. But when I left studies, I got my first commission shoot was documenting albino and transgender African males who were being slaughtered, literally murdered in these townships for being who they were. I don't know how much you know about the albinos. They used them as booty, used them as medicine in tribal traditional fare, which is just horrific. So my first shoot was with a British-based company, Oxfam, an NGO, which has little pockets around the world. And I did my first shoot with them, and something spoke to me in that the humanity of what I witnessed and how I actually broke through the issues of HIV and AIDS, the issue of transgender equality, equal rights, homosexuality, all these things that come into the fray, which I, as a 19-year-old, was petrified. Remember, AIDS in the early 2000s was just a no-no. It was, we saw AIDS as what was happening in America amongst drug addicts and homosexual communities. And yet in Africa, I realized very early on that the pandemic, the issue of AIDS, was not what was experienced in America. It was violence against women. It was rape. It was poverty. It was just anger amongst the men who, as you know, in Africa, we have huge issues around the male role and the dominance, because we have chiefs and we have autocratic rulers, and that women have had a really, really hard start in life here. But things are changing. So that impacted me hugely. And I found that the transition away from the creativity of what I was giving in dance, I was giving it now to photography, because I had a voice. And that voice was the image that allowed me to go into places in Africa that had huge impact. And I could take an image. We dealt with issues of river blindness or whole generations of young adults between 18 and 35 years old dead because of AIDS. And so we had kids being looked after by grandparents, 12, 15, 20 children to one gogo, we call them. A gogo is a grandmother in isiZulu. And now they live on a government stipend of $10, $15 a month. So the issues are real. And I just left the whole westernized style of photography, wanting to do shoots for Vogue and Vanity Fair. And I plowed the next 20 years of my career into the NGO sector. For Oxfam, UNICEF, World Health Organization, 53 organizations from Eritrea and the Horn of Africa, right down to Cape Town. So it's been a beautiful journey, and one I like to share with audiences, because there's such richness to what we can learn.
That's fascinating. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper. First of all, you touched on something that reminded me of the movie Searching for Sugar Man, which was a documentary. Are you familiar with it? Yeah.
Rodriguez, yeah.
About 10 years ago. Yeah. I don't want to give it away because it's kind of done as like a mystery, but really encapsulates what life was like in South Africa for a big chunk of time, what you're talking about there. I want to get into how you developed a relationship and got your way into Nelson Mandela, into working with Nelson Mandela and his foundation. But first, before I do that, I want to ask about what captivated you about him, about his leadership, about his rise. What was it initially that just encapsulated you in such a powerful way that you said, I have to find a way to meet this man?
That's a beautiful question. My mother died when I was 15 from cancer, and my father lost his job as a white man in South Africa, and he had to leave. So he left for 6 years. So my formative years are from 15 to 21. I was orphaned, and I went to a boarding school here in KwaZulu-Natal. And it just so happened, a young boy needs guidance, leadership. He needs, strong adult male figures in his life that he can use as a sounding board. And I happened to have been in boarding school, and we were invited to the opening of a building in Durban, which is the main city on the east coast here in Southern Africa. And blow me down, this elderly gentleman, about 100 yards away from me, there were about 8,000 people in this audience on the street. This man was Nelson Mandela. And I remember looking at my bordermaster that evening, and I remember looking up at him, and I said, that's the man I'm going to journey to. And
was he president at this time or not yet? Or
yeah,
when was
it? President. It was 1995. He had been president just over a year.
Okay.
And I knew of him as Mandela. I mean, he had grown in such notoriety and fame around the world by the time he was president. And something in me clicked. I saw, before I knew his politics and his culture and his heritage or anything, I saw this grandfather figure, and it spoke to my heart, and it spoke to my type of personality that I have. And I literally began a journey. John, it wasn't the fact, and I allude to your second part of your question, it wasn't just that, I want to meet Nelson Mandela, he's going to meet me. You have to appreciate that Nelson Mandela over the last, his presidential years was very much about famous people coming to South Africa, go see Robben Island, go see a place of heritage, and then go see Mandela. And present him with a check or a donation to his trust and his foundation, which is beautiful. And here I was as this 15-year-old or 16-year-old South African white boy who was 600 kilometers away from his home in Johannesburg, dying to meet him, and I just couldn't. I wrote 72 letters over 9 years to the Mandela Foundation, to Robben Island, to the Office of the Presidency. I mean, I used to call them my letters of rejection. So what I'm trying to say here is that I was a young boy who was a ballet dancer in a world that was often ostracized, creative arts like that, who had a dream to meet Nelson Mandela, had no way to get him because I had no money behind me and I lived 600 kilometers away from him. And yet for 9 years, I held true to that dream. You know what, John, whether I got to Mandela or not, that's not the important part. And I don't like to harp on that. But what I like to harp on is that particularly to audiences that I speak to around the world, Mandela gave me a life worth living. He was the end goal. And whether or not I reached that end goal, which is beautiful, I did, it gave me the purpose and it gave me the direction I needed to achieve a life that had some form of value, you know. It was a struggle. So by the time I got to him, so what happened was I realized in the last 4 years of trying to find him that he was not going to see me. There was not a chance in hell that he was going to see this white boy who was now 19 years old who wanted to meet him. So what I did was I packed my bags. I had nothing to lose. And I spent the next 4 years of my life going out around South Africa to document visually places and people and environments and that had some kind of a history to Mandela. And what opened up for me was an absolute miracle. I got to work with former state presidents, apartheid leaders, P.W. Botha, F.W. de Klerk. Archbishop Desmond Tutu became a wonderful friend of mine. He was the first person to endorse and support my arts trust, which supports young artists to educate themselves here in South Africa and abroad in the States. And so I grew this incredible community around me. But it wasn't until I sacrificed 18 months of my life. I went to go live on Robben Island, 8 kilometers.
Insane to me. What was that experience like?
Robben Island, I used to call it the Rotten Island. I had 2 birthdays on the island. It's a Dutch word. The word Robben is a Dutch word for seal. There are so many seals that use it as a place to copulate and just, have populations. But the island itself is 50 hectares. It's got no natural water, but it has its own weather climate separate to continental Africa. And on this island, 10% of it is a prison precinct. And they, for 360 years, colonizers from the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the English, and then the Afrikaner used Robben Island as a place of isolation. The whole concept divide and conquer. They used to go into the hinterland, into Africa, and literally steal the chiefs and the leaders. And by taking away the leadership, they could just conquer these African communities who were living in peace. And so there were many, many, many hundreds of these chiefs that died on Robben Island. And so 10% of the island is a prison. And it was that prison that in 1964, Nelson Mandela began his life imprisonment. And the reason why I committed so much time is I needed to try and understand how, John, this is so important, how do you come out of 27 years of imprisonment and preach forgiveness? It blows my mind that they weren't tortured physically, but the emotional, psychological isolation, it would have broken me in the first week. I mean, even in the first day Mandela got there, I know this is all documented. A prison warden came to them, a Nazi sympathizing prison warden came to Mandela and he said, "Today you have lost your name. You are no longer Nelson Mandela. You are a number." They gave him a number 46664, which was prisoner 466 in the year 1964. And they said, you will die on this island and go out feet first in a cardboard box. Now, however you look at it, that's a curse. So I needed to understand how these men endured this place. So I gave my life to this island. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu once said to me, he said, the magnanimity of these men like Nelson Mandela, there is no truer word. He was magnanimous in his graciousness towards his former enemy. And, after spending so much time, I used to submit these portfolios, these little ring-bound, jumbo-sized portfolios, postcard-sized, to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And that's what got me in. That they recognized the work I was creating. And it was so funny because I offered them for free. I said, use them. So what we did was in 2004, a year later, we launched the Mandela Center of Memory, which is our presidential library to Nelson Mandela here in Africa, based on 18 of my pictures, my photographs from Robben Island. Mandela personally went through them, and he chose, because he spent 18 years of his 27 years in prison on the island. So he personally chose 18 images that he could relate to, that could tell his story on the island. And he offered to pay me. So I said, Mandela, you're not going to pay me. You're mad. You're Nelson Mandela. I'll do it for free. And he says, no, I respect you as an artist. And Mandela bought me my first car.
Wow.
23 and a half years old. He got my first car.
That's an amazing story. I want to hear about that. But prior to that, first of all, let me ask you this. How did you fund all of this, all these years? Did you find creative solutions? How did you support yourself? How did you spend 18 months? Was there someone?
You know what? There was always an end goal, and I would do anything. So I was a waiter at a restaurant. Even my first, you're not going to believe this, my first 3 years working with Nelson Mandela, I was still a waiter. I was working with him in the morning. So I was still living in Durban. So I would get the phone call, no, Mandela needs you 10 o'clock the next morning. There were no airplane flights after 8 o'clock at night from Durban to Johannesburg, an hour flight on the 737-400. I used to leave home at 2 o'clock in the morning. I used to be in waitering clothes in my garb, and I used to get a WhatsApp, or not a WhatsApp, a SMS or a text message or an email. Oh, Mandela needs you here or there the next morning. I used to work till 11 o'clock at night, come home, shower, sleep for 2 hours, and get in my car and go. Wow. And it went on for years. The way I used, because
the 6 or 7 hour car ride from Durban to Johannesburg.
About 6 hours, yeah.
Wow.
So I was there waiting because it was very competitive. So I worked as a waiter. I did odd shoots, any shoots I could find. I mean, I was a wedding photographer. I was photographing people's pets. I was starting documentary photography. So I was supporting myself by hook or by crook within the industry of photography. And after about 3 years, I realized that my work was growing. I was maturing as a photographer. And I gave up the waitering and went full into what I still currently do today. Yeah,
there's got to be these moments where you're going between shooting, world leader of all time, Nelson Mandela, and then the next day you're waiting tables and some tables upset at you because you forgot to bring the ketchup or something or the salt or whatever, I mean.
I write about that in my one book autobiography, my first autobiography. The thing is, you might look at it now and go, but how? How do you even do it? One, I wasn't paid enough to be with Mandela. I couldn't support myself on that, even though I was doing a few shoots a month. And secondly, for me, it wasn't about the money. I just wanted access to Mandela, and I would do it even if I wasn't paid. So it was there, but then I still had to support myself.
Yeah. And I actually waited tables as well for a while when I was younger in college and high school. And I think it's amazing preparation for providing great customer service to anyone you're working with. So for sure, it's helpful. Yeah. I want to ask you about your first time that you met Mandela, not counting the time you saw him at the building opening. And I also want to ask about any particular incredibly memorable times that you were with him. Let's start with the first time.
The first time was orchestrated. They had accepted my images, and we set up on the 13th of August, 2003, this occasion that I had with Mandela. And they said, you've got 10 minutes, you're going to be introduced to him. You take a couple of pictures if you want, and that's it. Full stop, nothing. And it ended up being about an hour and 20 minutes. Mandela started telling us about stories, and I started capturing his images. But what really endeared me to the Mandela Foundation was that, one, he was relaxed around me. And two, I was creating images that became memory images. I took one of the most famous photographs ever. There are two photographs of Mandela. One was his hand. I took the palm of Mandela's hand. And the other one was the only portrait study of Mandela's Amandla fists. And they loved that. And I remember when I first heard him it was amazing. I'd spent years trying to get to this point. And I remember him coming through the door, and Chiara was standing in the corridor, and I'd been beckoned into the sort of ante-room, this lounge, and he walked towards me. Now, I didn't know anything about protocols. John, you know what protocols are like working around presidents, and particularly in the White House. But, you perhaps taught, but I wasn't. I was straight off Robben Island, having lived on this seal-infested island, and now I had to behave in a way that I had no idea. No one had taught me. So I walked up to him and I took hold of his hand, and I'll never forget, I looked at him and I didn't know what to call him. What do you call this great man? And I just said, "Good morning, Mr. Mandela Madiba, sir." And I bowed. It was so embarrassing. I just bowed. Like, what do you do? And he laughed, and I said, immediately I went, Madiba, which is the clan name we give him. I said, "Madiba, it's taken me 9 years to meet you." And he just looked at me and he says, "Yeah? And why didn't you just phone me?" I was like, "Yes, you and 7 billion other people in the world."
He has such a great sense of humor.
And that's how it went on. And I'll never forget, it was about my 4th or 5th shoot with him over about 2 months or whatever. I was doing ad hoc work. There was nothing that said I was ever going to see him again. So every shoot I did with him, I was like, "This is it, last time ever." And he turned to me the one day and he had someone, I can't remember, some famous guest, and he turned to him and pointed to me and he says, "Yeah, you see that young boy?" And I looked around thinking, "Oh, is there a young boy around Mandela?" And he was looking straight at me and he says, "This young boy, he is my Prince Harry." And he stopped. And I looked at him and I was like, why was he called? I do not have ginger hair, and I'm not royal, and I don't even look like the man. But then it was crazy. So everyone heard it around, and they all kind of laughed and waved at me. But ever since then, Mandela called me Prince Harry. And then I sat with a few people at the foundation, and you know why I think he said that? I had nothing to offer Mandela. I was a middle-class white boy who was just looking for opportunity. The only respect that I could give Mandela was to wear a suit. Whether I was in 40 degrees centigrade or 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the desert or in his homestead in Kulu, or I was in an office building or on a street, I always wore a suit. It was the only thing I could do to give this man, saying to him, "I respect you." And it actually worked for me because, journalists, as you know, don't always, maybe in the White House they do, but, when you're out in the field, like my work, they wear khaki and they wear, it's journalism. Right. But I was there in a throng of 50 to 100 of these press journal media from around the world. And there I was in a black and white suit with a red tie or a green tie or something. And it was amazing. Mandela would look out at the audience and he would look for me. And then I would get the shot of him looking at me. So it worked for me. And I think that's why he called me Prince Harry, because I was so neat, smart.
What's amazing to me from all that is when people meet their hero, rarely do they have the presence of mind to make them relaxed. And oftentimes you hear these stories of people that fumble over the words, they're nervous, that sort of thing. So I'm sure Mandela experienced that frequently, to whatever consolation that helps you, But was there something that you did, you think, that made him feel relaxed around you in those early days?
I wrote that first biography 5 years ago, and I started asking people around Mandela who I worked with, like his personal assistant, the director, the CEO, or the chairman of the foundation, and they had a collective answer for me. And it's one of the greatest quotes that someone's ever written about me. Zelda, his personal assistant, said to me, Matthew, whenever you walked into the room, you never had an alternative agenda. You were there to respect Mandela and to focus on the job at hand. You never asked for signatures. You never asked for photos of you and him. You went in there, you weren't loud, you were a fly on the wall. You went in, you did your job, you did it well, and you left. And then we were able to harness the images from what you captured. And I mean, so for me, that means a hell of it. It means that I did my job well. I remember when Mandela died, an American journalist from, I can't remember, Washington Post or someone emailed me and actually phoned me, and they said, "Hi, we've been put your name. Apparently you photographed Nelson Mandela for many years at the foundation. And he said to me in the same breath, how come I haven't ever heard about you? And it was almost like, well, you must be lying. You must be why are you masquerading saying you worked with Mandela when we haven't heard you? And I said, and my answer to him was, then I did my job well. It wasn't for fame. It wasn't for money. Mandela was my grandfather. He was Mkhulu. He was Tatum Mkhulu, which is the Zulu word for he was the great father, and I needed that in my life. And if I could be there for him to photograph what was needed and leave, that was all I needed, Yeah.
You mentioned that the reason that you went to Robben Island was in part because you wanted to figure out how he retained his, in your words, magnanimity, in spite of the harsh conditions, in spite of just the desperation, the horrors that he went through. And he walked out of prison preaching forgiveness. Then you spent 10 years with him. After that 10 years with him, did you find an answer to that question? Were you able to figure out what it was that enabled him to retain that spirit about him and to walk out of prison preaching forgiveness?
And the simple answer is yes, I did. You don't always have to talk to a person to appreciate them or to respect them, but to watch them. I had the privilege of being this fly on the wall when he was meeting American presidents, when he was meeting imams of mosques or rabbis of Jewish communities or Christian community or whoever, it's children. The common thread that Mandela, you know what, John, he had gone through so much pain, so much anger and hatred that could have destroyed him. Any point in his life could have destroyed him, but at every point in his life, he chose life. He liberated himself because he knew that if he did not put down his rock, I call it a rock of forgiveness, lay it on the ground, a physical act, which he did on Robben Island when he returned. He picked up a rock and he laid it down and he says, this far, no further. I knew that, in his words, he says, I knew that when I left prison, when I walked through that gate, I had to leave behind me the things that caused my pain and anger, because not only did he have a nation to build, but he had to build it in himself first. The strength came from within. He had really gone through the murk. He had gone through the cesspool of what any human being is capable of surviving. And he popped up on top, a better person for it. I've met Holocaust survivors, and I've met people who've experienced huge pain and tragedy in their lives, whether it's HIV and AIDS or families decimated, floods or whatever. There is a common thread of life that exists with these people. And I really did. I didn't expect that going into my experience with Mandela, but it came to the fore so often that he was at peace with the world. He was at peace with himself. And he was so self-effacing. He never, yes, of course, the attention would have been on him. But, he said to Oprah Winfrey when he visited Chicago for her show, the Oprah Winfrey Show, he stood in the wings and Oprah said, are you ready? And he says, and what is the topic of conversation today? And then Oprah said, you, Madiba, you the topic of conversation. And I think that just speaks volumes for the type of man he was. He just, he didn't accrue power or wealth as a president. He's the only African president ever to relinquish power after one term. What does it say for our generations? We've got African presidents who are 48 years in presidents. Their sons are the Minister of Finance. You can just imagine where that money's going.
Right.
And yet here we have a man who was ridiculed by his other African leaders for serving one term. And he said to them, I created this power base so that I could hand it to the next generation. And it's a beautiful thing, not without its flaws, but certainly rising up.
You worked for him up through when he died in 2013. Any other memories that you want to share? And I don't want to minimize all the other work that you've done. I do want to get to asking about that as well. But obviously we want to talk about Mandela, but anything related to his death or any other memories you want to share?
Oh, thank you. Look, I never went to the funeral. It was just too much for me. I grieved him on my own. It was a very difficult situation because, to me, he was to the world, he was just my boss, you go there, but he was so much more than that. He transitioned me into manhood and he allowed me to witness some rare moments in his life. And so when he died, obviously the public outpouring was huge. But I was able to step back from it all and just pick out little inferences. When he left, he came to Johannesburg in the 1950s, and for the first time as a rural boy. I mean, he grew up in rural Eastern Cape. And the longest memory I have now is when the Hercules aeroplane, the big military transport plane in Pretoria, moved his coffin into the plane for the last time. And when he left Johannesburg for the last time, just like the Queen leaving Buckingham Palace this past week. It's heavy because there's such history to that. So these are the memories I take. And because I know the family well, and I know the places that hold such a value to Mandela, I found myself going back to these places to remember with joy and to remind myself of his legacy. He's so important that we remember his legacy now. We're battling as a country. We've forgotten his legacy. We've iconized him. We've put him on our money. We've put him on monuments and memorials. But where is the common man intersecting with Mandela and his legacy? How do we do it? And that's what's so important to my life now, is to keep alive this memory of Mandela. So he's not just this icon on a plinth, but he's this human being who suffered and came out the other side a better person.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing those stories. Really enjoyed hearing them. I want to ask about some of the other work that you've done. You've worked with a number of U.S. presidents. You worked with my old boss, President Clinton. You've worked with 3 U.S. presidents, Carter and Obama as well. One of the most common questions I get is what they were like behind the scenes. So I'll turn it around and ask it to you. What were your experiences like behind the scenes? Because the photographer sees it all.
Yeah, you do. You literally, you see the good, the bad.
Yeah, literally. I mean, like, in the White House, sometimes everyone else, all the other staff, everyone else gets out of the way. They have to leave the room, but the world leaders and the photographer.
That's right. I mean, look at Pete Souza. I'm jealous of that man. The privilege he had in the photographs. I'll tell you what, I've got his book and wonderful.
Yes, his photography is amazing. Yes. Yeah. He's got so many iconic photos.
President Clinton, I mean, he one of the best orators in the world. I mean, President Clinton, wow, when he got up and he spoke, and just like Obama, I always say President Obama, those who've had the privilege of shaking his hand, he really does have the best handshake in the business. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've read articles on this, how he engages with people, and it's true. He's a beautiful man. I love him. He just, the way he reaches out to you and just treats you. Me, the little pleb photographer, there was respect, and he even smiled. And I remember I really, really, really wanted to shake his hand, and protocol didn't allow me. And he went up on stage. Just before he went up on stage behind the green room, there was 5 steps. And I remember cowering down behind a Secret Service agent, and I put my head down and I put my hand up, and I looked at him and I just said, I want to shake your hand. And he just gave me this biggest handshake. It made my day, and I just wished him good luck. And he was just a man of the people. Jimmy Carter, I think how old is he now? 101, 102 now? I mean, it's incredible.
Something like that. Yeah.
I met him with the Christian organization Habitat for Humanity. He was doing work with other African leaders in Africa, and I had the privilege of documenting his work out in South Africa for Habitat for Humanity. And I mean, salt of the earth, my word. There are no frills around that man. Just salt of the earth, tells it like it is, doesn't want to talk about anything remotely interested in fame, fortune, or anything. He's obviously a committed Christian, but he just, the job at hand, how can I serve? A man of service. And this is really what I've appreciated about my work with American presidents, is they're men of service. And it's very inspiring for someone who's not American and yet has the privilege of coming to your country and to see all walks of life. I've had huge privileges working with a cross-section of your communities in America. It's wonderful.
I know we're running a little short on time here, but so many other amazing organizations that you've worked with, from, as I mentioned in the intro, Nobel Peace Prize laureates to, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Annie Lennox, former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, not to mention hairy situations, scary situations, where you put yourself at risk. Any other experiences that you can share from a lifetime of photography?
I think it's the image is the memory you take. But you know what, I when I think of heroes, I think of young street urchins, Black African kids who battling to even put shoes on their feet, who get found and start ballet and win the Prix de Lausanne in Switzerland, the greatest ballet award in the world, because somebody took notice of them and trained them as a ballet dancer. There are miracles upon miracles happening in Africa every single day that I just can't feed myself enough with them. As I said, grandmothers who are looking after 10 grandchildren, or a fisherman in the Madagascan Channel, who I waded out with him, and he saved my life because in the riptide, the slow tides, there were 2 bull sharks, or what we call Zambezi sharks, who were circling us, and it was just his education on how to keep them away by slapping the water with his long harpoon. The sharks didn't like the vibration, so they stayed away. He saved my life. Now, no education, no Western education could have saved my life that day, except for a man who's never set foot in a classroom, never picked up a cell phone, or even knows what a laptop or computer is. At 75, 80 years old, he saved my life. And this just brings us to the common denominator of our humanity. And whether it was Mandela, Tutu, or someone who's dying of river blindness, a parasite in the eye in East Africa or whatever, the resonance is the same, is our humanness. And I just think we sometimes miss the boat sometimes, and hopefully the image can keep speaking.
We were talking beforehand about another South African who is having a big impact on present day, on the world, really, on culture, on society, and that's Trevor Noah, the host of The Daily Show, who means so much to your country and cares so deeply about it. Such an interesting person, so articulate, uses his comedy to educate. And you've had a few projects that he's been involved in that you could share.
Oh, that's great. So I spent a lot of time speaking and lecturing and doing presentations to children across South Africa. And Trevor Noah is just is another hero. He's an absolute renegade who's just fitted into American society, and we're so proud of him here in South Africa through his comedy and through his education. So very often, if people don't want to listen to me, I get him to do a video for me as a complete surprise. So these kids sit there and they listen to me, and then I said, I've got a friend who wants to say something to you, and it's life changing for these kids. So my huge kudos and to Trevor for what he's doing, and for never forgetting where his roots are. I mean, his grandmother was the matriarch of his family, a beautiful woman who I never met, but it resonates with our society and our communities, the respect we have for our elders, and he's never forgotten that. So wonderful man.
Yeah. Wrapping things up, I ask everyone this. I call it my gratitude question. And I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude, especially to those who've helped you along the way. Obviously, we spent a big chunk of time talking about Mandela and the impact that he's had on you. But I'd love to know who you would want to call out, who you'd want to just kind of thank publicly for being there for you.
John, thank you for that. There are 2 men that I really just a shout out. One man lives in America. He's in Cincinnati. His name is John Pepper. John Pepper was the former CEO for about 20 years of Procter & Gamble, and he was the former chairman of Walt Disney. And I met John without knowing who he was. He phoned me one day. I was in Germany doing an exhibition on Mandela, and he says, I'm coming to South Africa. I'm passionate to learn about Nelson Mandela. Can you take me around South Africa to teach me about Mandela? And I never charged him. He just paid for my flights and my travel to get to him. And we spent 2 beautiful weeks in South Africa in 2014. And we struck up a wonderful friendship. And John had the privilege of bringing to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center one of the world's most beautiful exhibitions on the life of Nelson Mandela, and which he helped fund, but also supported. I'm eternally grateful for that, because that affords the American people a window, an opportunity to engage with this man, Nelson Mandela. So, and John has always been there for me. Even if it's a little project I'm doing, he's interested, he phones, we chat. He's become sort of a father figure to me. So I'm greatly appreciative of John. And then secondly, is a man who, in the very, very early years of my career, stood up and supported me. And his name is Archbishop Desmond Tutu. a man who carried the moral conscience of our country on his shoulders, who was never afraid to stand up and speak for truth, to speak across the divides, a man who's one of his closest friends was the Dalai Lama. Bishop Tutu showed me what humanity was. He showed me what forgiveness was, just like Mandela, but he showed me how to stand up against foes and to win an enemy over. And I'll never forget, over the years that I had the privilege of photographing with him, I sat in his office the one day, and I was in a bit of a mood, and I was fighting things. And he looked at me straight. He came up close to me. Bishop Tutu said, "You know, Matthew, one of my greatest weaknesses is that I love to be loved, and to be vilified as a matter of course was excruciatingly painful." And what he said to me in those few words was, yes, life is hard, it's tough, but love is one of the greatest weapons we have against the downtrodden, against evil, against whatever, however you interpret it. And I never forgot those words. And he embodied so much of what I hold as valuable traits of what it is to be human in the world today. So thank you for that privilege to those two men.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious, one final follow-up question. I'm curious if those two worlds overlapped. I imagine they must have at some point, Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. Did you ever photograph them together? And it's always interesting to me also to observe two different worlds like that with overlapping interests. But when they come together, you know what I'm talking about, right? Sometimes there can be friction. There can be human elements to it. So did you ever experience those two together? And if so, what was it like?
Oh, yes. No, I mean, both of them are characters. I mean, they became these two little naughty schoolboys. Bishop Tutu came to the Mandela Foundation. I can't remember why he was there. But anyway, they had an audience with Mandela, and they were naughty in such a good way. Like, I never forget, there was an occasion, I wasn't there for this occasion I'm going to mention, but Bishop Tutu was going on and on about Mandela wearing those beautiful frilly shirts that he used to wear, the Mandela shirt. Yeah. And he said, "How can anyone respect you, not wearing a suit and whatnot?" And Mandela turned to Bishop Tutu and he says, "Yes, and that's rich coming from a man who wears a frock, who wears a purple dress." So there was such camaraderie between these two men, and they got it. John, they got it. Their passion for South Africa and for humanity was larger than life, and they just understand. It wasn't just those two. We revere those two, but there were so many around that held that same spirit. We call it Ubuntu. I am because we are. It's that togetherness. And I just hope, I just really pray, John, that I can use it in my life going forward to keep paying it forward, because we sure need it in this world today. We sure need it. Yeah.
Matthew, this is what fuels me, is getting to talk to someone like you and having these types of conversations and hearing your stories. Thank you for taking the time to share these stories, to preserve the memory of all these amazing icons that you've worked with, and to also share a side of them that we would not normally see, that you captured through your vision, through your artistry. So I just want to thank you for that. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
Thank you. I have a website, just www.matthewwillman.co.za. And on there, you'll see portfolios of my work, but then I have books that I use to sell, which I raise funds for my arts trust. We don't ask people for money for my trust. We pay, like what Van Gogh didn't manage to do. We sell art in order to raise funds. So we have students overseas that are studying photography, ballet, obviously, learning about our history. Just my website is the best portal to get hold of me, to contact me. I do come to the States and do a lot of public speaking, so lovely to reach out to anyone who's interested to have me around. So thank you.
Great. Matthew, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.